Chris, make it live. Does everybody have a handout? And see if we can get this up. Proverbs 18 and 21. Proverbs 18 and 21 said, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and they that love it shall eat the fruit thereof." I'm trying my best to get a hold of our slideshow and control it. See if this works today. We're going to talk about communication and how those women, they're such a problem. We've got Ruby in the room, and she's trying to translate, so I just had to say that for her benefit. I want to talk about communication, and I want to talk specifically about conflict. I want to talk about having difficult conversations. The number one issue for most men is you don't talk, especially in your marriage. You don't talk. I don't want to talk about just husbands and wives, but I want to talk about handling conflict because, again, it's not something men do very well. Not just men and women, but it also, the information applies in the corporate world as well. It's very difficult to have difficult conversations, and I want to talk about having a difficult conversation. I only have tonight, I'm not going to extend this. We probably could go 6 months on having difficult conversations because it is so difficult for most people to have difficult conversations. So let's talk. Proverbs 18 and 21 says, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and they that love it shall eat the fruit thereof." I really think that scripture, the implication of that scripture is, if you are a talker, you can win and lose by your conversation. There's an imagery that I think works very well. The yin-yang, the Chinese yin-yang symbol, the little swirl, black swirl with a white dot and a white swirl with a black dot. And the basic idea of the Chinese yin-yang symbol is there's a little bit of good in every bad. In every evil, there's some good. But in every good, there's some evil. And I think that really applies in this scripture. Good and bad, life and death are in the power of the tongue. And whoever wields that will bear the fruit of it. That's not necessarily a positive or a negative. It's a yin-yang. If you wield the power of the tongue well, then you're going to be receiving the fruit of that, the benefit of wielding your tongue well. But if you do a poor job with your tongue, you're going to reap the fruit or the negative fruit of the poor job of using your tongue. So we want to talk about using your tongue in the context of conflict. So would you pray with me the Lord help each of us, because very few of us handle conflict very well. Nobody likes conflict. Most of us avoid it. So we want to pray that God would help us with that. We thank you, Lord, for your great grace, abundant, overwhelming mercy. God, I pray wisdom and understanding today as we talk about these things that will help us in our life, in our job, in our families. I pray, God, your anointing upon us in Jesus' great name. I thank you for that. I praise you for it. I had a conversation with a young man today, and this is not why I'm teaching the lesson, but it really applies. He and his mother were in conflict. And he came into my office and basically said, do you know what my mother did? Do you know what she said? And do you know how she approached this? And I just cannot understand how in the world she would say that to my girlfriend, that she would act like that in this situation, that she would have this kind of a conversation. And he was actually pretty upset about it, the way his mother handled some stuff. And I think when he walked into my office, I think his goal was that I would go and handle his mom for him. I'd go take care of the problem and talk to her. And that's not what I did. And as we sat down and talked, I began to talk to him about who he was and who his mom is. And this really applies for everybody that has parents, or if you're a parent and you have children. There's no way that let's say a 50-year-old and a 20-year-old, there's no way that a 50-year-old is going to see life like a 20-year-old sees it. There's no way that a 20-year-old is going to be able to see life like a 50-year-old sees it. If you don't know yet, some of you are younger, if you don't know this yet, you're going to find out just as soon as you start dating. Women are different than men. They communicate different. They think different. When you say something, what you think you're saying is not what they're hearing. And what they say to you, you can't hear the words that they say. You've got to hear what they mean by the words that they say. Not the words that they say, but what they mean. Men, it's really easy. Most of us, we try and say what we... It's not a good idea in a marriage to say what you think. So then you kind of learn to not say what you think and say as little as possible in marriage, because you're afraid that you're going to say the wrong thing, which ends up being a self-fulfilling prophecy. You back yourself into a corner, afraid to say anything, and you end up using the wrong tool. I had a conversation with a couple months ago that were in some marriage difficulty, and he told me adamantly, he said, you know what, I've always just shut people out, shut them down, and just gave them the silent treatment. That's what I did in this situation. My wife made me mad, and so I'm just going to sit there and I'm not going to say anything. And he thought in his mind, win-win. I'm not going to argue. There's going to be peace because I'm not going to say anything. And the problem is my wife keeps coming at me trying to fix the problem and talk to me about it. And I'm giving her the cold shoulder. And cold shoulders always work for me. And so it should, we're probably going to head for divorce. And there's nothing, I don't know anything else. Literally, he told me, I don't know anything else. That's the way I've been raised. I just block everything out, shut everybody out, go to my room, and that's the way it works. Well, the truth is, that's the way you get divorced. And I have some guys that have been around a little longer, and you hopefully will amen me as I move forward through this lesson. I hope that you'll amen me. Some of it you may already know, and I'm sure some of you already do know. But the principle is you got to look at it like this. Communication is a tool. And there are a variety of ways to communicate. There are a variety of tools in your toolbox. You can use the tool of silence, the tool of cold shoulder, the tool of anger, the tool of yelling, the tool of fleeing. You can use the tool of argument. You can use the tool of logic. Doesn't work. Yeah, thanks, Wayne. None of those tools work. So what works, Wayne? Yes, dear. Sometimes it feels like that's about the only thing that works. Yes, dear. But we're talking about developing a different set of tools and looking at your conflict in a different way than you look at it at first. Most of us engage in conflict and become emotionally involved in conflict. And once you get emotionally involved in a conflict, it's very hard to step back from the conflict and look at it from a different perspective, which is one of the reasons you have a pastor. If you get into a deep conflict situation, generally I'm not involved in the conflict, and I can see both sides of the story, and generally there's two sides to the story, and generally both sides are wrong. Generally. Everybody's generally got some fault, and you could find fault with either side, generally. In most conversations that I've ever had of couples in conflict, generally there's two people that are wrong. Not two people that are willing to admit they're wrong, but generally there's two people that are wrong. There's always hers, mine, and the truth. You have an accident out on the road, and you've got what driver A says, and you've got what driver B says, and then you've got what the video camera says. Anybody recently see the shooting in, I think it was South Carolina, North Carolina, somewhere? The cop shot a black man running away from him. And when they interviewed him, he was the only one there that saw the shooting of the police force. When they interviewed him, he said, "I feared for my life." Well, then the New York Times or LA or somebody posted a video, and there was some kind of conflict, some kind of wrestling that went on, and the video started at that moment, and the black gentleman turned and ran away from the officer. He pulled his weapon and shot the man 8 times in the back, and they have it on video. Now, if the black man, he died there at the scene. If he had opportunity, he would say, well, it happened this way, and this is why I ran. I was afraid for my life, or I was whatever. And so that's the reason this escalated. And the police officer, we know what he said. He attacked me. He tried to pull my weapon from me. He tried to pull my gun, and I was afraid for my life. And so I shot him in the spur of the moment. The video says by the bystander who's not involved in the conflict, is not angry, is not fighting the police officer, hasn't done anything wrong, standing over, videoing. That video shows a small conflict and the black man turning and running, and the police officer pulling his gun and shooting him as he ran away. 8 times he kept shooting him in the back. Now, that's the point. If we all had video mounted in our home, we could get back to the root of our argument or our problem. Or if we had video always at work, you could always go back and run the camera back and say, okay, this is what was said, this is what happened, and it still isn't going to solve the problem, at least not in a marriage or in a relationship, because it's not often about what was said, it's how we feel about what was said. So, Luke 6:45. There's a couple of great scriptures. A good man out of the good treasure of his heart bringeth forth that which is good, and an evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart bringeth forth that which is evil. For the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Period. 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 Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Out of how you feel about a situation or a person or a circumstance, or you feel slighted, or you feel hurt, or you feel damaged or injured, you will speak out of your feeling more than you will speak out of what happened, what was said, what was done. You will, your emotional state, how you've thought about, how you fretted about, how you were afraid. I'm afraid that if I go to work and I bring something up to the boss, that it's going to happen this, this, and this. And you think about, and here's the key, what you think about is what you're putting in your heart. Be careful what you let yourself think about. Be careful what you're afraid of. When you allow yourself to chase down your fears in your mind, well, this means this, and this means this, and this means this, then your emotion and your body, your mouth, will act out of what happens, what you're afraid of, what hurts you, what bothers you, what you deeply think about. And the worst thing in the world is to get into an argument with somebody who has an emotional state and they're disconnected. That's the hardest thing in the world because you can't deal with emotions because most of us hide our emotions. Huh? Wayne, I think that might be just above their head. He said menopause. It's got to be a couple of us older guys. We might understand that, but you younger guys will eventually figure that one out. There's a lot of emotion that goes through a person. And people tend to speak out of their emotions. Sorry, we moved out here, Henry. Ecclesiastes 5:2-3. Be not rash with thy mouth, let not thy heart be hasty to utter anything before God, for God is in heaven, and thou upon earth. Therefore let thy words be few. For a dream cometh through the multitude of business, and a fool's voice is known by multitude of words. I've said this before, and I just step away from what I'm talking about and just talk about this. I had an individual in my office who is a backslider, and I felt like today, literally today, I was being played because there were so many words. So many, well, I can prove this, and I'll show you this, and I've got the paperwork, and here I'll show you, and I'm going to prove this, and I'm going to prove this, and literally I couldn't get a word in edgewise. Onslaught of words. And I thought about this. For a dream cometh through the multitude of business, and a fool's voice is known by the multitude of words. If you're ever, some of you are headed towards ministry, developing your ministry, when you meet someone as a minister and they won't give you time to talk, generally they're hiding. There's something they're not telling you. In the multitude of words that they pour out, there's something they're hiding and they're not going to tell you. And you really need to be very, very careful. I will admit, as your pastor, I know of one occasion where a woman was dating a man and he had a multitude of words, and she felt like she was getting in love, and I didn't step in. I promise you, I regret it today. I didn't step in and tell her what I really thought because she was already smitten, and it was too late in the journey for me to throw a hammer down. And today, she wishes I would have spoken because that individual was not what they said. You can't always listen to what someone says. You have to watch what they do. That makes a difference. So I love Dilbert. Dilbert's no longer being made. I don't think it's in the cartoons anymore. But a number of years ago, some Dilbert cartoons. And so we're going old school with a couple of cartoons. And Dilbert's boss says there, whenever we disagree, I always end up yelling. That's an indication that you have, he's talking to Dilbert, you have poor personal skills. I'm sending you a class to improve them. Now, that sounds more like a marriage than a boss. I've got a problem, and you're the problem, and you need to go fix it. Then the third little deal, it looks like you've gained weight. Would it help if I started jogging? This is exactly what I'm talking about. I think that's hilarious because that sounds like a husband and wife argument. You know, he's going to throw a logical point out there to an illogical point, and it's not going to be received very well because people speak out of their emotions. Don't speak out of their logic, especially when you're dealing with ladies. And I was not going to say that much about ladies, but Ruby has abandoned us. So I'm a little more free to declare the difficulties that we have. In fact, I actually did have that one up there. So if you're going to have a difficult conversation, here's some things that you need to think about. Number one, what's your purpose for having the conversation? What are you trying to accomplish? Where are you going? Have a clear image, a clear idea of your outcome. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People says, start with the end in mind. Know where you want to go. It's been said, and I keep referring, I really don't want to talk about just husbands and wives because we have conflict everywhere. Uh-oh, she's back, and I'm going to have to be good. Women are spaghetti in the way they think. They think multi-directional, and they're emotionally able to handle 4 or 5 conversations and 4 or 5 different at the same time. Most men are not able to handle that. Most men have 1 or 2 thoughts, and that's about it. And we keep them neatly in a row and straight. Everything's worked out. You know what you want, where you want to go. Ladies deal with, oh, look at her shoes. I like her hair. Look at that purse. Man, do you think she's mad at me? What do you think about Susie over there? Is she okay? I feel sorry for her. I've been praying for Susie. And my wife's having this conversation, and I'm going, what? Hold on here. Hold on. Stop the train for a second. Now let's go down one piece at a time. I don't really care about the shoes. I don't know anything about purses. I think she's fine sitting over there. And yeah, I'm sure she's mad at you. I'm positive that's true. You know, and it takes a long time to kind of catch up with that spaghetti of everything that's going on through their mind. So when you're having and you're going to have a conversation, you need to have an outcome. You need to have an end goal. You need to know where you're going. I'm talking to guys who aren't even married yet, and a guy that's just now been married. And there's just so much to it. I'm kind of bumbling just a little bit because there's so much. And as I'm talking, I just keep thinking of all these other things that are part of marriage. I want to say, don't ever use the D word. There's a 4-letter word, starts with D, that you should never, ever use in marriage. It's 4 letters, D-I-V-O-R-C-E, 4 letters. You never have a conversation with that word. That word is the worst curse word in a marriage. I tell you, I'm just overwhelmed with thoughts. I'm not sticking with my notes. I just keep thinking. A woman is interested in her house and home, and she first and foremost wants to protect the home, secure the home, and nest the home. You think of it like a bird. A bird will pull out its feathers and pull out its underfeathers in order to make a nest comfortable. A woman will pull out of herself. She'll sacrifice and give in order to create an atmosphere at home of cleanliness, straight, everything straightened up, no socks on the floor, no underwear on the floor, nothing on the end of the bedpost. And so when you walk in, if you walk in and a place is straight and clean, you feel rested. But if you walk into a place that everything's pell-mell and stuff's thrown everywhere and laying on the floor, and it feels chaotic. And for a woman who goes into a place like that, unless she's probably depressed, most women want a relatively clean house. Everything straight, orderly, neat, and all of those things, generally. So they're interested in the home. It's got to be safe. Again, I mentioned my wife. If I forget to lock the doors, my wife makes sure. She'll go behind me and make sure the garage door is down, the front door is locked, the back door is locked. She goes through to protect and feel safe. And I've told her, and I've quit telling her this, I said, honey, there's a rock laying outside the window. He can smash the window, reach in, unlock it, and get in this door in about 3 seconds. That's all it takes for somebody. If they want to get into our house, we can lock the sliding glass door, but it's really not that hard to get in if somebody wants to get in. I quit saying that. She didn't sleep all night long. I'm not going to say that anymore because that safety and security in the home is extremely valuable to her. So when you're talking about something, you've got to realize what's going on inside of the other person. Number 2, what assumptions are you making about that person's intentions? If you go into a conversation assuming that the other person means something bad, then that's the way you're going to write the story. That's the way you're going to have the conversation. You're going to be defensive when you start. You're going to be angry because you feel like there's a ulterior motive. There's something happening. There's going to be something going on, and you're going to come at the conversation that way. You're going to carry your baggage into that conversation, and it's going to taint the conversation. You're not going to be able to succeed. I talked about the young person and his mother. It took me a little while, but I started talking to him about his 50-year-old mother and how she looks at life. And she's been through 25 years or what, if he's 20, 30 years, more life than you. She's had to pay bills. She's had to take care of problems. She's raised you all of this time. She's headed towards retirement. There's all these different thoughts that she's thinking. She's already married. She's already got her kids raised. She's not going to have more kids. And so she's thinking at a 50-year-old level. Well, how do you think? Well, I think like a 20-year-old who's in school or in college or has got a job or is looking to get married. And I'm thinking about, reaching and obtaining and getting. And, well, your 50-year-old mom's going to look at it from a completely different perspective. Who in the room thinks that you think like a 50-year-old woman? Who in the room thinks that you're going to have the same goals as a 50-year-old woman? Thinks you respond emotionally like a 50-year-old woman? No, so if you're going to have a conversation with a 50-year-old woman, what does a 50-year-old woman want? What is it she needs? What is she trying to accomplish? When you have a conversation with your mom, what's your mom trying to accomplish? In the end of the conversation, I pointed out to this young man that your mother is wanting you to succeed. And she is playing blocker for you. She is trying to get out in front of you and knock anybody or anything out of the way that's going to keep you from succeeding. She's a bulldozer pushing problems out of your way, trying to make it easier for you to get through life. And he went, I'd never thought about it. I thought she was just being mean to me. Well, we all have conflicts. What is going on inside of the other person? Famous words about this are you need to listen to understand. You need to hear what the other person. Seek first to understand. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. You need to listen to what the other person says and what they mean, not just what they say. If you ever want to succeed in marriage, you need to find out what your spouse means, not what they're saying. What they're saying and what they mean are 2 different things, often. And they hide what they mean. My wife used to do it to me. A simple thing is the trash, and I've talked about this in the distant past. My wife would pull, we've got a little trash box that the door closes and the trash is inside this little wooden box. She bought it, she likes it. So that's where we keep our kitchen trash. And you pull down the front and you put trash in it, and then you can close it up so nobody sees the trash. So you pull it down, stuff it, and when I'm putting stuff into it, I just keep putting stuff into it and pushing it down, trying to not have to carry it out to the garage. And so she would, when it got so full, she would pull it out and leave it down. Well, when I walked by, I'd close it. And then she'd walk by and pull it down. And I would walk back by and it's open. I'm like, what in the world? I know she wants it closed. I know she doesn't want anybody seeing it, and I'd close it. Well, in her mind, in my wife's mind, she opened the trash thinking my husband will see that the trash is full and he will know that it needs to be emptied. And so he will get the trash out, pull it out, take it out, put it in the trash bin in our garage, go and get a new bag, pull it out, and put it down in the trash can. I thought my wife's going to throw a fit if this thing's open, so I'm going to close it so she doesn't see it. We'll get to it eventually when it really fills up. And for a while, she would pull it down, and it didn't work for me. So she would pull out the trash bag, stretch it out, and set a small entrance into the garage. She'd set it in that entranceway. And often when I'm leaving, I'm in a hurry. Go and grab my glasses and grab my wallet and grab my stuff, and I'd just walk by and move the trash out of the way and go out in the garage and get in the car and drive away. And my wife would come downstairs and see the trash, now kind of in the bathroom instead of in the doorway, and she would go, didn't he understand? And I'm telling you, I did not, for a while. I'm slow. Why couldn't she say, I'm going to put this in front of the door and I want you to take it out? No, she just did it and assumed that I would understand. And her assumptions made her very angry on occasions because I wouldn't take the trash out. And literally, I'm thinking of what all I've got to do. I'm going to succeed. And I'd walk over around the trash. Well, now that she's stopped me and we've had a conversation or two about taking the trash out, it's really not any big deal, and I think of it now on a more often basis. But it really matters what the other person thinks. And you don't know what the other person thinks without having a conversation with them, without sitting and trying to understand how they think. What's going on in your mind? What do you mean by this? And I warn you, when you're young in a marriage, she doesn't want to tell you. You're supposed to be so perfectly in tuned and happily married that you know by nature. You're just attuned to her, and you're going to understand through osmosis exactly what she wants and means and run and go do it before she ever even says it. And if you don't, she's angry at you. Come on, help me, some of you guys, help me. Ed, be careful. You might want to move up here, Ed, if you're going to amen me. We got to have a conversation. And you got to have a conversation in a way that's non-threatening. If you have a conversation, do you think your wife's going to really talk to you openly? if your nostrils flare up and your eyes bulge out and you huff or puff or show how frustrated you are. I'm having to listen to you again. My goodness, you just keep talking. And no matter if you say it, but you show it, it shows that you don't really care what she's saying, what she means. You've got to be able to listen in an emphatic, sympathetic way. So, how do you listen sympathetically? You ask questions. Well, honey, you repeat back what someone says to you. Now, let me get this right. You said we need to go and pull out the trash, carry it to the can whenever you've got it open or whenever you pull it out, and it makes you mad that I'm not. Right? Did I get it right? Is that what you meant? And give them time to explain what they mean without, what did you mean? I'm sorry, I am thick-headed. I have problems hearing. I have problems listening. I have problems obeying you. However you want to say it. I need to hear what you have to say and what you mean. Would you please, and I explain it back to you. This is what I heard you say. This is what you meant. Am I correct? And then you give that person opportunity to say, you're not getting what I really meant. And then it's really good because she starts to explain it in a way that a mere man can hear it. Very, very few times, lots and lots of people have difficulty explaining and saying what's true and what they really mean. It's very hard for lots of people to do that. It's very hard for guys to do it. It's very hard for guys to have bad, negative conversations. In my house growing up, a negative conversation was a war. My mother picked up chairs and threw them at my brother. He ducked and they went out the window. My older brother got into a fight my mother didn't like, said something. She jumped on his back, grabbed him around the throat, and started slapping him on the head. And he ran up the stairs, down the hall with his head down like this, trying to block her blows. And he ran into our grandfather clock, which sat at the end of the hallway, and smashed it to pieces. And it fell down to the floor, destroyed. She slapped him one time and broke her finger. She slammed the door in the house and broke her finger. We threw each other around. I beat the snot out of my brother. One time, I almost killed my brother. One time. He did something that made me mad. My younger brother was the worst pest in the world. And so I ran down the hall, and he ran in his room and slammed the door. And I ran down the hall, jumped up, and kicked his door, almost kicked it off the hinges. I was so mad. And I ran into the room and grabbed him by the throat. And I was choking him so hard he wouldn't breathe. My brother picked up a glass of milk and threw it in my mother's face. My mom came in. I'd been working out, was wearing a pair of shorts and a T-shirt in the house, and had my weights laying around and had been working out. And she didn't like something I said, and she ripped off her rubber slipper and walked over to me and just started beating me on a sweaty leg with a rubber slipper. And I sat there and looked at her. And then I watched down, and the welt started rising. As my mother was beating me on the leg, the welt started rising. And she was determined that I was going to cry, and I was determined I was not going to cry. And I stood up, picked up my mother, and threw her across the room onto the couch on the other side of the room and said, "You'll not do that to me again." Now, I know how to fight. I know how to yell and scream. I know how to have that kind of conflict. But I never found that was a beneficial conflict. And so I spent my entire life avoiding conflict and trying to learn how to have conflict without having that. I hated some of my growing up. I was in church, went to church, was somewhat in church. My brothers were, half of them were in and half of them were out. My dad was never in church. And my mom's a fighter. She's still a fighter today. And so we always fought. To solve a problem, we fought. I hate conflict. I don't like it. It's important. You got to do it. You got to, and as a pastor, I've got to stand up and say, hey, we're going to do this and that. But I'm telling you, it's not pretty sometimes. Conflict's not fun because no matter how skilled you develop, no matter how much you work on yourself, it's two people in a conflict. And sometimes not everybody's worked on that. And even in a marriage, sometimes you're working with someone who's had a lot of other stuff go on in their life. And their life looks like my life without 50 books on self-management and praying and going to conferences and sitting and listening to couples fight, repeatedly fight, and trying to figure out how to help them and working on it. And I'm telling you, conflict is a real issue. And you need to learn, you need to develop a way to fight fairly. I know I'm not really going on my notes. I'm sorry, but most conflict feels like a fight. It feels like an attack. It feels like somebody's attacking you. The rawest human nature is, I will defend myself. And if you're hurting me, then I guarantee you I'm going to hurt you. And most conflict that ends up poorly is someone feels hurt and they go into the conflict with the idea that I'm going to hurt you. And that always ends up poorly, especially if you don't take time to listen to what actually the other person intended. If you don't hear what they really meant and what they're trying to accomplish, and you judge them as hurtful, then you're going to hurt them. It's just the nature of conflict. But the vast majority of conflict situations that I've ever had to deal with and work through, if both sides would have just stopped and listened and heard what was going on inside the other person, heard what the other person intended. Because often we hurt each other unintentionally. Rarely do we hurt anybody intentionally. You're a bunch of nice guys. I mean, I don't have the thugs of the earth in here. There's some young people, you know, the hood with their pants down. And I saw a little video on Facebook. This kid he could barely talk. And he stood there in a little pair of shorts on the porch. He's covered with tattoos. He's 4 years old maybe, and couldn't talk well. And he went, somebody had him on the phone, and he said, I'm going to you up. And I mean, I've never heard the like of swearing. I've never seen the like of tattoos on a 4-year-old kid. And he was a master at cussing and swearing and attacking somebody. And so disappointing, disturbing to see a child trained up in how to hate and how to misunderstand. My point is that we need to learn to have a conflict and have it well. So how do you have a good conflict? I don't have this in my notes if you want to write this down. Here's a couple of things that I know and I've studied. If you have conflict that's out of control, if you have arguments that turn into fights, that turn into yelling, that turn into whatever, how do you solve that? If you have someone who likes to fight with you, likes to argue, likes to get loud, likes to do that, how do you fight fairly? The best way to fight fairly is when someone gets loud. The louder they get, the quieter you get. Try to be as quiet as you possibly can. If you're dealing with someone who's loud, go quiet. I really do want to teach you some principles, and here is one of the best principles you can learn. If you go up, when you go up and you go loud and you go angry and you start yelling, your pituitary gland kicks in, your adrenaline gland kicks in, adrenaline fills your body, and you get into a fight or flight syndrome, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's the way God designed your body. You're going to punch something, or you're going to run away to keep from getting punched or punch something. That's the reason husbands and wives, when they have conflict, generally the husband wants to leave the conflict, go out in the garage after he gets angry. And you hear conversations that sound like this. Now, let's stop it right here. We're done. I don't want to talk about it anymore. I can't handle this. I'm going to leave. I've got to. And the man, his adrenaline starts pumping, and he wants to fight, or he wants to run. It's the way God designed us. And the problem is, you have, after adrenaline hits your system, it takes 45 minutes for adrenaline to get out of your bloodstream. I mean, it takes a long time for you to calm down. And that's the reason, generally, not everybody does it this way, but generally, men want to go to the garage and tinker in the garage, because they can take a hammer and beat on some nails or something and kind of drain some of that adrenaline out, and not drain it out on their spouse or on the situation. They try to get away. And it's a physiological problem, not a spiritual problem. It's a physiological problem. It's the way you're designed. It's not a spiritual problem. Now, the spiritual problem is keeping yourself under control. There is a spiritual problem there. So I want to talk about the physiological of it, though. When you go up, nature abhors a vacuum. Do you know what that means? Here's the principle. When an airplane's flying, and we've probably all seen movies where an airplane flies and somebody throws a grenade or shoots a window out, and there's this violent expulsion of whatever's not tied down. The plane rips open, and anybody standing in the aisle gets sucked out, and all the luggage and everything goes sucking out, and pretty soon a minute or so goes by, and all of a sudden it kind of calms down. There's still a gaping hole, there's still wind blowing, but that big suction is gone. What happens is they pressurize a cabin up to ground level pressure. But when you get up to 30,000 feet, there's no air. There's no pressure. Up at 30,000 feet, you die because there's no air. And so there's a difference in pressure inside the plane and outside the plane. And the plane is made not to rupture. But when it ruptures, there's an equalization that happens rapidly as all the pressure inside the plane rushes to the outside in order to have a balanced pressure. And I don't know what the pressure numbers are for inside a plane versus outside a plane, but that's the violence that happens. In a relationship, the same thing's true. We try to have equilibrium. And if everybody can have their voice at this level, then everybody stays together. But if you have a person that's going, your tendency is to rise up to their level. And generally when you're in a conversation or an argument and you rise to their level, they feel challenged. And so they rise up. And when I'm in marital counseling, I teach it in steps. You literally go step, step, step. And the other person, if you're both stepping up, you're feeling challenged. And the other person raises their voice, and so you raise your voice. And they raise their voice because they feel challenged. And especially for men, it's a competition, and we don't ever want to lose a competition. Men like to compete, and so we raise and raise and raise, and you end up with an uncontrollable situation. All kinds of things get said that never should have been said. So how do you stop that? Here's a key point. Don't go up. Go down. The louder you get, the more enraged that you can become, the more your adrenaline pumps, the more out of control you are, the more likely you're going to say the wrong things, the more the other person feels challenged. But if you're having a conversation and one person's going, rah, 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 and the other person's going, now, I'm not sure why you're upset, but would you please tell me? The person going, rah, rah, they're out of balance. And either you've got to go up or they've got to come down. Why? Because nature abhors a vacuum. Why do we go to Life Tabernacle Church? Because we're all in sync. We like church like this. We like where the music plays. We may not like every song, but we like the music playing. We like the way we worship. We like having an altar service. We like God moving. We like it. But other people who come into our church, they're in sync with the world. Do you know why worldly churches are having such great success? It's because people feel very comfortable coming in sweats and jeans and ripped clothes and short shorts, and because that's the atmosphere of the church. And so they don't have to change anything. They can come in and feel comfortable just as they are. Do you know why people get saved in our church? Because they come in and say, you know what? I don't want to be what I am. I want to be what they are, what God's doing in their life. Dave Stokely is a perfect example. He sat in the back. He watched Brother Stutt worship, and he said, I want to be like that. He saw an life and a hunger for this, and so he traded in his whole life to get this life. Otherwise, he would leave. Why? Because he's out of balance. The Bible tells us you can't be unequally yoked. You can't have a cow pulling to the left and a cow pulling to the right. They're going to be frustrated. They're going to wear sores in their neck. You have peace in a marriage when everybody's equally yoked and headed in the same direction. And then everybody's carrying the weight, and it's a balanced life. Sometimes preachers preach, you ought to marry somebody in the church. Well, why? Because I was raised in a home, spent my whole life in a home where my dad was going this direction and my mom was trying to go this direction. And they fought, and there were sores all the time. There were constant sores because they were pulling in different directions on the yoke, and they never could get in alignment to go in a single direction. And so my whole life was conflict. That's not the way we're designed. We're designed to line up, to link up, to be at peace, to try to understand each other. And there's so many scriptures. And I almost brought out, if you want to do an interesting study, maybe I'll do this next month. Look at what we're supposed to be together, what we're supposed to do together. There's a phenomenal number of scriptures that talk about us together. It's 8:11. I need to quit. Ruby's tired of waving her arms around, preaching the gospel back there. I spoke more than your question. Anybody got a comment? I certainly throw it open for comments. Ladies aren't charging out here yet, so you're going to have to wait till they get done before you leave anyway. There's a lot of this. It is covered here. What buttons are yours being pushed? How is your attitude towards the conversation influencing your perception? Who's the opponent? The conversation I had with a teenager earlier today about his mom. You think about that. In his mind, his mom was the enemy. His mom was, putting on the rules. She's forcing me to do stuff, telling me I need to quit doing this. And, my mom's the enemy. Well, by the time we got done with the conversation, he saw that his mom was a bulldozer in front of him, carving a path in front of him. Well, he walked out with a completely different perspective of his mother. His mother's a friend, a helpmeet. She's protecting him, maybe a little overprotective. Yeah, there's room for improvement, okay, but she's not your enemy. She's your friend. And when you're looking at someone who's fighting battles and you think, well, they're fighting against me, well, it changes your perspective entirely if you think, well, they're fighting for me. You think about that person completely different. Listen, the person didn't change. What they're doing didn't change. The only thing that changed was your perspective. You can't change other people. You can't change your wife. Landon, you can't change your wife. The only thing you can do is change your perspective, how you feel about what's going on. Doesn't mean you give up and roll over and let her do whatever she wants to do and boss you around. She's not the boss. Some of you older guys say, well, that was pretty weak, fellas. So, look at the bottom here. I thought this one was great. I've never seen this image. Don't be hot and blow up. Don't be cold and give up. Be cool and in control. Which, my family, we were always hot. Rarely, my dad was the cool guy. He was always composed. My dad rarely fought. My mom always fought. My dad rarely fought. But he wasn't cool and giving up. Cool is, I'm going to give you the cold shoulder. I'm going to run away. I'm going to leave. I'm going to go to my mom's house. I'm going to whatever. That's not a solution. If you could, step back from your situation and think about the way you handle whatever conflicts you have as tools. Are you using a hammer to solve the problem? Are you using a saw to cut somebody up? Are you using a drill to drive your way through somebody or through a situation? Or are you going to gently sand someone down and polish them up and finish them so you have a nice piece of furniture? There's a whole variety of ways that you can reframe the argument, and the way that you handle a situation, the way that you handle the argument. If you're always going forward, I'm going to drive over you, drive through. You're a screwdriver trying to drive through somebody, and people don't like to be driven through. They don't like to be driven over. As your pastor, I try not to drive over people. Some people may feel like I have in the past, and that may have happened. That's not what I'm trying to accomplish. Literally, I believe my job is to be a servant to help you succeed at what you're trying to do. That's what I see my job as, to almost like that mother go in front of you and try and pave the way. If I see the problems before you get there, I'll try to help solve the problems. I don't always see every problem in front of a situation, but if I do, I'll try to solve it. Ask Ruby. Ruby will tell you I try to solve all of her problems. I try to solve Ruby as a problem. I'm always trying to solve that. Okay, comment? I'm not trying to just randomly go places, but I've just seen so many conflicts and people having conflicts, marriages having conflicts, people have conflicts at work, and it's pretty hard to handle them sometimes. especially if you only use one tool. You're raised using one tool, and you think the only tool I can use is what my daddy used. My daddy was always a hammer, and so I've got to be a hammer. And my wife, here's another perspective. My wife, he's a hammer. Today, he hits everything. He hits everybody. He just stands up and casts. He basically, I don't mean physically hits, but he hits with his words. He just tramples you down. He beats you down with his words. That's the way he's always handled it. And sometimes my wife, being raised in a home like that, she expects me and receives, no matter what I say, she receives it as if I'm doing that to her. Well, you're beating me down, you're beating me down. She's not using the words, but that's kind of the way she perceives it. And I've had a number of conversations over the years. Honey, I'm much more like my dad than I am like my mom, I think. And I'm much more non-confrontational. So, again, it helps when you understand how that other person sees you, sees the problem. You understand the other person. The more you understand them and what they're thinking and how they think, the better you are at solving the problem. Chris. Right. But here's the problem. Generally, if you have a person who wants to escape, the other person wants to continue the conversation. And as you're trying to escape, they feel abandoned. They feel like you're abandoning them. Are you going to leave? Are you going to divorce me? Are you, especially in marriages, you never coming back? Are you not going to come home tonight? What does this mean that you're walking away out to the garage, getting in the car and going to drive around the block? What does that mean? And because you're upset, you're going to get in the car and try and drive away. You don't want to talk about it. You don't want to blow up. You don't want to continue the conversation. You're trying to flee. And the other person generally wants to pull you. And the more they pull you and try to keep you in the conversation and keep you engaged, the more you want to flee and get away from it. And so it's this great big struggle between a person who thinks, oh, if they walk out, I'm losing then. I'm losing the battle. And you think, if I stay, I'm going to lose my mind and I'm going to flee. And so both of you are working against each other. Where if you're a flee person or you have to flee, say, look, I can't handle it. I'm going to go to the store. I'm going to go to Target for a half an hour, 45 minutes. I'm going to go get a coffee down at Starbucks. I'll be back at 10 o'clock, or I'll be back at 9 o'clock, or I'll be back. And so you're confirming, I've got to get away, but I am coming back. And you ease the fears of the person you're in conflict with. And generally, I'm talking about, in this situation, a husband and a wife. So the other person, you allay their fears, and that's a big part of handling conflict. If the person is afraid, then they're not going to handle it very well. And you've got to reduce the other person's fears. They've got to feel like they can talk to you. They've got to feel like they can trust you. If they can't trust you, you can't resolution. If they think you're going to blow up, or you're going to scream, or you're going to call them names, or I haven't even brought up, you're going to bring up the problem you had 3 years ago. If you're in an argument, you're juggling one ball. You can't juggle all the balls of all the 5 or 10 past arguments that you've got. Nobody can juggle that many problems in a conversation. You juggle one ball. You handle one problem. You solve one problem. They're done. Okay? Comments? You ready to be released? Thanks. And then I've got this one, which I think is hilarious, because this has happened a number of times. Executive Steering Group took your recommendation to cancel all design products. What? I didn't recommend that. Uh-oh, your poor communication skills have sowed the seeds of your destruction. And he walks home to his dog. Am I unclear? The dog says 6 o'clock. I think that's hilarious. Because I found myself in that situation, and really communication means over-communicate. I'm reading a book right now, a great book. I know I told you I was going to let you go. Here, let me just show you the book. If you're interested, if you want to read and improve yourself and improve your communication skills, here's oh, it's not going to show up there, is it? Turn the Ship Around. I'm actually listening to it as a book on tape, and it is a captain of a submarine, captain of a nuclear submarine, takes one of the worst submarines in the Navy and goes in and they work on communication. It's probably more the reason I'm teaching this than anything, because he does such a great job of communicating. I wish I had time to tell you they're out. They're going to be standing at the door saying, "What's he doing with my husband? Get out of here." So I've got to let you go. Great book, Turn the Ship Around. If you're interested in a leadership book, self-development, a way to think about communicating, it's a great book. I recommend it. Captain L. David, I think it's Marquette. I'm downloading it real fast. Hold on one second. There's the cover. L. David Marquette, Marquet. You can buy it. If you're a Kindle person, you can buy it on Kindle for $5 or $6, $7, maybe $8. And then you can buy the audio version for about $10 or $11. So it's about $20, and you get both. So you can read it, and you can listen to it in the car. I listen to lots of stuff in the car. So this is one that I'm halfway through right now listening to. It's a great book. One of the principles used to be the captain. Everybody had to wait on the captain to tell them what to do. He turned it around, and I really like this idea. He said, if you're in a job, even the lowest seaman first class, if you're in a job, you should know your job, and you should know when to do your job. And so you ask, instead of him waiting on him to tell you, you ask up. And so, first officer, I'm ready to dive. The radar is clear. There are no targets. We're in plenty of water. We're 800 meters. We got room to dive. We're ready to dive. And then the officer says, go ahead. And that's all he says. So you give him all the information, and then he gives permission. Instead of waiting on him to know everything and tell everything, it comes from the bottom up. And he turned the ship around from being one of the worst submarines in the Navy, getting the worst scores. No enlisted men would re-enlist. After being on that submarine, they wouldn't re-enlist. They all wanted out of the Navy. And in 9 months, with a new thought process, he turned the ship around, and it became best-in-class nuclear submarine. Incredible. They got the highest marks, and his staff became some of the highest percentage of men who moved up and became captains of ships and submarines and all of that because of that a completely different style than the Navy was used to. And he got permission from his upper authority to change the way they thought about it. And he went in and changed the way they solved problems from a bottom-up perspective instead of a top-down perspective. It's a much more effective